Imagine walking into a crowded bar on an ordinary evening. Music playing softly. Glasses clinking. People laughing over conversations that won't matter tomorrow. No one notices you at first. And honestly, that's exactly how you prefer it. No spotlight. No attention. Just a quiet moment in a noisy place. Now imagine something else. Across the room, someone decides to turn that quiet moment into a test. Not a fight. A test. The kind that happens in public spaces more often than people realize. A comment made a little too loudly. A laugh meant to get attention. A challenge hidden inside a joke. Most people would react instantly. Anger. Embarrassment. Defensiveness. But what if someone didn't react the way everyone expected? What if the person being tested stayed completely calm? No raised voice. No dramatic reaction. Just quiet observation. Tonight's story explores a situation like that. A fictional scenario inspired by the idea of discipline under pressure. Picture this moment clearly. A bar filled with strangers. A confident biker leaning back in his chair, enjoying the attention of his friends. And nearby, a quiet couple sitting at the counter. The man is calm. The woman beside him is smiling softly, unaware that the mood of the room is about to shift. Then it happens. A careless remark floats across the room. Not loud enough for everyone to hear. But loud enough. Just enough to turn a peaceful evening into an uncomfortable moment. Now the room feels different. Not tense. Not violent. Just curious. People glance up from their drinks. Waiting. Because everyone expects the same thing. They expect anger. They expect a confrontation. After all, that's what usually happens in situations like this. But sometimes the most surprising response is no reaction at all. And that's where this story really begins. Because when ego tries to provoke a reaction, and the other person refuses to play the game, something interesting happens. The balance of the entire room slowly begins to change. And the question is no longer, is there going to be a fight? The real question becomes something much more interesting. What happens when arrogance meets calm composure? And why does that quiet confidence make some people far more uncomfortable than any argument ever could? That's the moment we're about to explore. Moments like this don't begin with shouting. They begin quietly. A comment here. A look there. A subtle shift in the atmosphere that most people can feel, even if no one openly acknowledges it. In crowded social spaces like bars, people naturally form small circles of attention. Some are there simply to relax after a long day. Others come looking for energy, excitement, or sometimes validation. And occasionally someone tries to take control of the room. Not through violence. Through presence. Through loud confidence, teasing remarks, or jokes that push just a little too far. The biker sitting at the table near the center of the room had that kind of presence. Leather jacket draped over his shoulders. Boot resting casually on the bar stool rung. Friends around him laughing at nearly everything he said. To them, he was the center of the evening. The kind of person who enjoyed being noticed. Meanwhile, at the far end of the counter, the quiet couple remained mostly unnoticed. They weren't trying to stand out. They weren't competing for attention. They were simply sharing a quiet moment together. Something that can feel surprisingly rare in a loud place filled with strangers. The man sitting there, calm and relaxed, had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention. But if someone looked closely, they might notice something different. Not dominance. Not aggression. Just stillness. A kind of quiet awareness that comes from years of discipline and focus. This is where the story draws inspiration from someone many people recognize, Keanu Reeves. Over the years, Reeves has often been associated with intense preparation for film roles, particularly in action-oriented projects like John Wick. For those roles, he spent long periods training in choreography, movement control, and situational awareness, skills designed not for real-world conflict, but for creating believable cinematic performances. Yet the idea behind that preparation is interesting. Discipline, focus, control under pressure, not reacting impulsively. These qualities don't only belong in movies. They are psychological habits. Ways of responding to stress that anyone can develop with time and practice. Back in the bar, the biker didn't know anything about that. All he saw was someone quiet. Someone who looked like an easy target for a casual joke. And in environments where ego plays a role, silence is often misinterpreted. Some people see calmness as confidence. Others see it as weakness. So the biker leaned slightly forward in his chair, saying something just loud enough for his table to hear. His friends laughed. It wasn't an outright insult. More like a playful jab aimed at getting attention. But words have a strange way of traveling in quiet moments. Even low voices carry farther than expected. And the comment reached the couple at the counter. The woman paused for a moment, unsure whether she had heard correctly. The man beside her didn't react immediately. No sudden movement. No visible frustration. Just a slow breath. A calm sip from his glass. And a brief glance across the room. That small glance changed something. Because the biker noticed it. And suddenly what started as a simple joke turned into something else. A test. Not of strength, but of composure. And in situations like this, the next few seconds often determine everything. Will someone react emotionally? Will the moment escalate? Or will something unexpected happen that shifts the entire energy of the room? Most people watching quietly from their tables didn't know it yet. But they were about to witness something far more interesting than a simple argument. They were about to see how calm presence can change a situation without raising a voice. And sometimes, that kind of control can feel far more powerful than confrontation. The room didn't suddenly grow loud. If anything, it became quieter. Not because people stopped talking completely, but because something subtle had changed in the atmosphere. Conversations slowed. Heads turned just slightly. The kind of shift that happens when people sense tension but aren't sure where it will go. Across the room, the biker leaned back in his chair again, watching carefully. He had expected a reaction. A sharp reply. An irritated look. Maybe even someone standing up to challenge him. Instead, he saw something different. The man at the counter remained seated. No anger. No dramatic gestures. Just calm stillness. Moments like this can be confusing for people who are used to quick reactions. When someone throws out a challenge, whether serious or playful, they usually expect the other person to play along. But silence doesn't follow those rules. Silence forces people to think. And thinking can make situations feel uncomfortable. The biker glanced toward his friends, half smiling as if to say the moment wasn't important. But inside, curiosity had already replaced amusement. Why hadn't the man reacted? Why didn't he look embarrassed, annoyed, or defensive? Most people, when faced with public teasing, feel a strong need to prove themselves. It's a natural reaction, protecting pride, protecting reputation. But the quiet man at the counter seemed completely uninterested in that game. Instead, he simply turned slightly toward the woman beside him and said something softly. She nodded, her expression relaxed again as if whatever had been said had reassured her. That small moment of calm didn't go unnoticed. The biker shifted forward in his seat. Now it wasn't about the joke anymore. Now it was about curiosity. In stories inspired by personalities like Keanu Reeves, the idea often explored isn't raw strength, it's composure. Reeves has spoken in interviews about the discipline required for film roles such as John Wick, where preparation involves controlled movement, focus, and timing. Not chaos. Not emotional reactions. Control. And in this fictional scenario, that same kind of composure seemed to fill the space around the quiet man at the counter. He didn't stare aggressively across the room. He didn't challenge anyone. But there was a difference in the way he carried himself. His posture stayed relaxed. His breathing steady. His attention aware of everything around him without appearing tense. People who study body language often say that real confidence doesn't try to dominate a room. It simply occupies space without apology. The biker slowly stood up from his chair. Not in an aggressive way. More like someone stretching his legs after sitting too long. But the movement caught the attention of several people nearby. A few bar patrons glanced between the two sides of the room, sensing that the situation might develop into something more dramatic. Yet nothing dramatic happened. The biker walked a few steps closer, not directly confronting the couple but close enough that his presence could be felt. Again he waited, waiting for the reaction that still hadn't come. The quiet man looked up briefly. Their eyes met for only a second. No challenge. No fear. Just calm awareness. And oddly enough, that calmness made the moment heavier than any argument would have. Because when someone refuses to react emotionally, it removes the fuel that normally drives confrontation. Now the biker faced a choice. Push the situation further. Or recognize something unexpected about the man sitting in front of him. And sometimes the tension in a room isn't created by shouting or movement. Sometimes it's created by the simple question hanging silently in the air. Who will control the moment next? Moments of tension rarely explode all at once. More often they unfold slowly, through small movements, quiet decisions, and the subtle signals people send without realizing it. The biker now stood only a few steps away from the counter. Close enough that the distance between the two sides of the room could no longer be ignored. A few conversations in the bar had stopped entirely. Others continued, but with that distracted tone people have when their attention is somewhere else. Everyone sensed something was happening, but no one knew exactly what. The biker rested one hand on the edge of the counter, glancing down briefly before looking at the quiet man again. There was still a hint of amusement in his expression, but it had softened into curiosity. This wasn't going the way he had expected. Normally, situations like this followed a predictable pattern. Someone made a remark. Someone else reacted. Voices got louder. And eventually, the moment either dissolved into laughter or turned into a heated argument. But here, none of that had happened. Instead, the man at the counter simply turned slightly toward him. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just enough to acknowledge that someone was standing there. His posture remained relaxed. One hand resting near his glass, the other loosely on the counter. Even the way he moved felt unhurried, as if he wasn't responding to pressure at all. In stories inspired by figures like Keanu Reeves, people often focus on action scenes or dramatic confrontations. But the real fascination usually comes from something quieter. Composure. The ability to stay centered when everyone else expects a reaction. Preparation for film roles like John Wick often involves learning precise movement and awareness, skills designed for choreography and storytelling. Yet those ideas carry an interesting psychological lesson. Controlled breathing. Balanced posture. Awareness of space. Not as tools for conflict, but as tools for remaining calm when emotions run high. Back in the bar, that same quiet control seemed to fill the space around the counter. The biker waited, perhaps expecting a defensive remark, or at least a hint of irritation. Instead, the quiet man simply met his gaze for a brief moment and offered a small, polite nod. Not submissive, not challenging, just respectful acknowledgement. It was such a simple gesture that it almost felt disarming. The biker blinked slightly, caught off guard by the lack of hostility. Most confrontations rely on emotional energy. When one person raises the tension, the other usually mirrors it. That escalation fuels the moment. But here there was nothing to mirror. No anger. No sarcasm. Just calm presence. The biker shifted his weight slightly, resting both hands on the counter now. For a second it looked like he might say something more provocative. But the words didn't come. Because the energy of the moment had quietly changed. And everyone in the room could feel it. When someone refuses to react emotionally, the entire dynamic of a confrontation starts to unravel. Without resistance, there's nothing to push against. Without anger, there's nothing to amplify. The biker finally exhaled a small laugh under his breath. Not mocking. More like someone realizing the situation had taken an unexpected turn. He gave a small shrug and stepped back from the counter. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't submission. It was simply the natural conclusion of a moment that had lost its tension. Behind him, one of his friends called out something jokingly, trying to lighten the atmosphere again. The biker waved a hand casually and returned to his table. Within seconds, the background noise of the bar slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. Music filled the space again. But the energy in the room felt slightly different now. People who had been watching quietly exchanged glances, as if acknowledging that something interesting had just happened. Not a fight. Not a dramatic scene. Just a quiet shift in control. At the counter, the man took another calm sip from his glass. The woman beside him smiled faintly, as if the moment had already passed for her. No celebration. No triumph. Just another peaceful moment continuing exactly where it had left off. And strangely enough, that quiet resolution carried far more impact than any loud confrontation ever could. If a moment like this were captured on someone's phone and uploaded online, the reaction would be almost immediate. Within minutes, people across the internet would begin debating what actually happened. Some would replay the clip again and again, zooming in on every detail. Others would jump straight to conclusions. Because the internet has a habit of turning simple moments into competitions. The comment section would quickly fill with one question. Who won? It's the question people ask whenever two strong personalities share the same space. Whether it's a sports rivalry, a debate, or even a brief social interaction, the instinct to declare a winner seems almost automatic. But sometimes that question misses the deeper point entirely. Because what happened in that bar wasn't a contest. There were no rounds. No judges. No clear moment where someone proved dominance. Instead, it was something far more subtle. It was a moment where ego met composure. And composure quietly changed the outcome. Online discussions often misunderstand calm behavior. Some viewers interpret silence as weakness. Others see it as a clever strategy. A few might recognize it for what it truly is, emotional discipline. When people watch fictional scenes inspired by personalities like Keanu Reeves, they often expect dramatic action. After all, Reeves became globally recognized for roles that emphasize intensity and precision, especially in films like John Wick. Those movies show characters responding quickly and decisively to danger. But what many viewers forget is that films are designed for excitement. Real life, especially everyday social situations, usually reward something different. Patience, awareness, control over one's reactions. In fact, psychologists often point out that emotional regulation is one of the strongest forms of personal strength. When someone refuses to be provoked, they disrupt the pattern that confrontation normally follows. That disruption can feel confusing to people who expected a dramatic response. Imagine the hypothetical video spreading across social media. Some viewers would argue that the biker backed down. Others would insist that nothing important happened at all. A few might criticize the quiet man for not defending himself verbally. But none of those interpretations would fully capture what actually mattered in the moment. Because the real shift wasn't visible in a single gesture. It was in the atmosphere of the room. When the biker first made his remark, the energy in the bar had begun to tilt toward confrontation. People looked up from their drinks. Voices lowered. The expectation of conflict quietly filled the air. But when the expected reaction never came, that energy had nowhere to go. Without anger, the situation lost its fuel. Without a challenge, there was no reason to escalate. The entire moment dissolved naturally. And that's something the internet often overlooks. People tend to celebrate dramatic victories. They share videos of arguments, shouting matches, or moments where someone puts another person in their place. Those clips spread quickly because they trigger strong emotions. But quiet resolutions rarely go viral. Calm doesn't generate the same excitement as chaos. Yet in many ways, calm responses require far more discipline. Remaining composed when someone tries to provoke you isn't easy. It demands self-awareness. It requires a willingness to let go of pride in the moment. And sometimes it means understanding that proving a point isn't worth the energy it would cost. That's the lesson hidden inside fictional scenarios like this one. The moment wasn't about proving who was stronger. It was about showing that strength can take different forms. Some forms are loud. Some forms are quiet. And in certain situations, the quiet kind can change the entire direction of a moment. If the scene had unfolded differently, if anger had replaced calm, the story might have ended in a typical way. Raised voices. Embarrassment. Maybe even people being asked to leave the bar. Instead, the situation ended with something much simpler. Normal conversation returning. Music continuing. Life moving forward as if the moment had barely existed. From the outside, that outcome might look uneventful. But for anyone paying attention, it reveals something interesting about human behavior. When ego tries to start a conflict, it relies on participation. Without participation, the conflict loses its purpose. And that's exactly what happened in that quiet corner of the bar. A challenge appeared. A reaction was expected. But instead of feeding the moment with emotion, someone chose something different. They chose composure. And sometimes that choice quietly ends the story before it ever becomes a problem. By the time the energy in the bar returned to normal, most people had already gone back to their conversations. Glasses clinked again. Music filled the background. Laughter slowly replaced the quiet curiosity that had briefly taken over the room. Yet for those who had noticed the moment unfold, something about it lingered in their thoughts. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it was intense. But because it was unexpectedly simple. The entire situation could have turned into something loud and uncomfortable. A single emotional reaction might have pulled everyone into a scene that no one in the room actually wanted. But that didn't happen. Instead, the moment ended quietly. And that quiet ending reveals something important about the nature of real confidence. Many people grow up believing strength must be visible. It must be proven, displayed, defended. We often see this idea reinforced in movies, competitive environments, and even everyday social situations. Someone challenges you. You respond. Someone insults you. You answer back. The pattern feels natural because it protects pride. But pride and confidence are not always the same thing. Pride reacts quickly. Confidence waits. Pride demands recognition. Confidence doesn't need it. In stories inspired by public figures like Keanu Reeves, audiences often focus on the intensity of action scenes. Films like John Wick are known for their precise choreography and dramatic confrontations. Yet behind those scenes lies something quieter. Preparation, focus, repetition. Actors spend months learning controlled movement and discipline so their performances appear believable. But the interesting part isn't the choreography itself. It's the mindset behind it. Training often emphasizes calm breathing, awareness of surroundings, and emotional control. These habits are not about aggression. They are about maintaining balance under pressure. And that same principle applies far beyond films. In real life, the ability to stay calm during tense situations can completely change the direction of an interaction. Think about the last time someone tested your patience. Maybe it was a careless remark. Maybe someone spoke to you with unnecessary hostility. In those moments, the first reaction that appears is usually emotional. A quick reply. A defensive tone. A need to correct the other person immediately. But what happens when someone chooses not to react that way? Something unexpected occurs. The emotional momentum stops. The other person suddenly loses the response they were expecting. And without that reaction, the situation often loses its intensity. This doesn't mean ignoring problems forever. It doesn't mean accepting disrespect in every situation. Instead, it means understanding when a reaction will actually improve the moment, and when it will only make things worse. In the bar, the biker likely expected a confrontation. That expectation shaped his behavior. When the confrontation never arrived, the situation naturally dissolved. There was no opponent, no argument, no emotional energy pushing the moment forward. Just calm presence. And sometimes calm presence can be more powerful than any verbal response. Psychologists often describe this as emotional regulation, the ability to observe a situation without immediately letting emotions take control. People who develop that ability tend to navigate social challenges differently. They pause before responding. They assess the environment. They choose their actions intentionally rather than reacting automatically. This kind of discipline rarely attracts attention. It doesn't produce viral moments. It doesn't create dramatic headlines. But it quietly shapes the way situations unfold. Imagine how many conflicts in everyday life begin simply because two people react at the same time. One raises their voice. The other responds louder. Within seconds, the situation escalates far beyond the original problem. But when one person remains calm, the pattern breaks. The tension loses its rhythm. And the conversation, or the moment, often resets. That's the real lesson hidden in the bar that evening. Strength isn't always about proving something. Sometimes it's about choosing not to. Sometimes the strongest action is simply staying grounded when others expect you to lose control. And the interesting part is that this kind of discipline doesn't belong only to trained professionals or fictional characters. Anyone can develop it. It starts with awareness, with breathing, with the decision to pause before reacting. Small habits that gradually change how we respond to pressure. In a world that often rewards loud reactions, calm composure can feel unusual. But when people witness it, even briefly, they tend to remember it. Because quiet confidence carries a kind of clarity that loud arguments rarely achieve. And sometimes, a calm response teaches a lesson without needing to say a single word. By the end of the evening, the bar looked exactly the way it had before. The music continued. People laughed with their friends. New conversations replaced old ones. To someone walking in at that moment, nothing unusual would seem to have happened at all. But for a few people who had quietly watched the interaction earlier, the moment stayed in their minds. Not because it was loud. Not because it was dramatic. But because it ended in a way that most confrontations rarely do. Peacefully. Without a winner. Without a loser. Just a quiet shift in understanding. In a world where many people feel the need to prove themselves constantly, moments like that can feel almost unfamiliar. We're used to seeing strength displayed in visible ways. Arguments, dominance, public victories. Stories where one person clearly wins, and the other walks away defeated. Those kinds of moments are easy to understand. They fit neatly into the narratives people like to share. But the interaction in that bar followed a completely different pattern. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Just a brief challenge that slowly faded when it wasn't given the attention it expected. And that raises an interesting question. What actually defines strength? Many people assume strength is about control over others. About being the loudest voice in the room. About proving that no one can challenge you without consequences. But real confidence often looks very different. It doesn't rush to defend itself. It doesn't chase recognition. And it rarely feels the need to escalate small situations into large conflicts. In stories inspired by public figures such as Keanu Reeves, audiences often admire the intensity and determination seen in films like John Wick. Those stories are exciting because they show characters facing extreme situations with precision and resilience. But what makes those characters memorable isn't only their physical ability. It's their focus. their calmness under pressure, their ability to remain steady when everything around them becomes chaotic. Interestingly, those same qualities appear in everyday life more often than people realize. Not in dramatic fights, but in ordinary situations where someone must decide how to respond to pressure. A careless comment, a misunderstanding, a moment where pride encourages a reaction. In those moments, people usually follow instinct. They respond immediately. They defend themselves. They match the other person's energy. And sometimes that instinct is understandable. But occasionally, someone chooses something different. They pause. They breathe. They observe the situation instead of reacting to it. And that pause can change everything. Think about how many conflicts in daily life grow larger simply because two people refuse to step back. One person reacts emotionally. The other reacts even more strongly. Soon the situation escalates far beyond what it originally was. Words are said that can't easily be taken back. Relationships are strained. Moments that should have been temporary become lasting problems. Yet the opposite can also happen. When one person decides not to feed the tension, the momentum of the conflict weakens. Without emotional fuel, the situation begins to lose its intensity. That's exactly what happened in the bar. The biker expected a reaction, a defensive response, something that would confirm the challenge he had created. But the reaction never came. Instead, he encountered calmness. And calmness is difficult to argue with, because calmness refuses to participate in emotional escalation. It doesn't attack. It doesn't defend. It simply remains steady. For some people, that steadiness can feel frustrating. For others, it can be strangely disarming. But for anyone observing the moment, it reveals something important about human behavior. Confidence doesn't always need to announce itself. Sometimes it simply exists quietly. And when people encounter that kind of quiet confidence, they often recognize it immediately, even if they can't fully explain why. The room that evening felt different after the moment passed. Not tense. Not awkward. Just slightly more thoughtful. Because everyone had expected the same predictable outcome. And when that outcome didn't happen, the entire atmosphere shifted. Moments like that remind us that strength isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about restraint. Sometimes it's about understanding that not every challenge deserves an answer. And sometimes the most powerful response is the one that keeps the situation calm. If the story had ended with an argument, it would have been forgettable. Just another loud moment in a crowded bar. But because it ended quietly, it carried a different kind of meaning. A reminder that composure can change situations in ways aggression rarely can. Maybe the strongest person in the room isn't the one who wins a confrontation. Maybe it's the person who understands when a confrontation isn't necessary at all. And in many ways, that kind of strength is harder to develop. It requires patience, self-control, the ability to stay grounded when emotions push you toward reaction. But when someone masters that kind of discipline, something interesting happens. They stop needing to prove themselves, because their presence speaks for itself. So the next time you find yourself in a tense situation, remember the quiet moment in that bar. Remember how easily things could have escalated, and how simply they resolved when one person chose calm instead of conflict. Because sometimes the most powerful move is the one that ends the conflict before it even begins. And if that idea changes the way you think about strength, even slightly, then the real lesson of the story has already done its work.